December the 12th, 2025. It's 2:10. We're on the record from 2:10 to 3:10. We're here to discuss AO 2024-123S, or the original version, an ordinance authorizing the municipality of Anchorage Water and Wastewater Utility and the municipality of Anchorage Hydropower to execute and enter into 3 agreements pertaining to the municipal public water supply and the Clutna Hydroelectric Project Fish and Wildlife Program. We'll start with introductions. Mr. Johnson.
Zach Johnson.
Jared Gerger.
Scott Meyer.
Anna Brawley.
Christopher Constant. Do we have Ms. Baldwin Day on the phone?
Yes, you do.
Thank you. Any other members on the phone? Okay, I don't think so. We're also joined by the administration.
David Persinger, General Manager, Anchorage Water and Wastewater Utility.
Michael McLaughlin, outside counsel to AWW.
And Mark Spafford, Deputy Municipal Manager and Anchorage Hydropower Utility Director.
We're also joined on the phone by Ms. Silvers just now. Second. So the assembly, these items were introduced months ago, early this year, with the intent to have them proceed through the assembly's process and see what happens to them. But after months of successive delays, in order to kind of take the onus off of the assembly to act when it wasn't ripe and ready, we referred the agreements to the Department of Law to do some work and to come back with a reasonable proposition to us. And so effectively what we have before us are some updated versions that have been, I believe, worked on by the Department of Law. So today's work session will be primarily driven by the review and analysis of the Department of Law, and then we'll have some discussion with utilities and their counsel. We have outside counsel here from Landy Bennett Blumstein, Andy Erickson as well. And so, and Leslie may be on the phone or not. I don't know, Leslie Need. And so with that, then we'll pivot over to our friends from the Municipal Department of Law.
Thank you. And thanks all for your attention to this. Just to help you navigate what you have in front of you, there are 2 versions.
Can you switch microphones or maybe pull it real close and see if it works?
Is this better?
Yeah, try a different microphone. We've been having some mic issues.
Better?
Can you pull it closer?
How about this?
That's fair. Thank you.
Okay. So to help you navigate the documents you have in front of you, there's the original version that was submitted in December of 2024, and then the S version. And we are asking you to take a look at the S version. That's kind of the predominant version. But there is some information in the original packet that might be useful. So the S version has the 3 contracts attached to it with some modifications that we made, but it does not have all of the technical attachments to those original agreements. So if you want to look at the original technical attachments that would also attach to the S version agreements, you should look at the original packet just to navigate that. But I'm going to actually hand this over to the presentation over to Dave Persinger from AWU and Mr. McLaughlin, our outside counsel, to kind of start walking you through why we're here and what we're doing.
Thank you. So I'll go ahead and start out. If you can go to the next slide, please. And I'd like to have Mike McLaughlin speak through the kind of the timeline that got us from way back in 1984 to today.
Thank you. Again, Michael McLaughlin from Guess and Red. I'm outside counsel at AWW, and I was involved in negotiating these agreements a couple of years ago. In order to understand kind of what these 3 agreements are and what they're for, you have to kind of go back and look at where we are today. And where we are today has to do with what is the nature of the rights, water rights that each of that parties have. Right now, the owner of all the water rights in Clutna Lake are the Clutna Power owners, the power project owners. AWW doesn't actually have any water rights of its own to Clutna Lake. What they have instead is a preferential use permit, which grants them the ability for public water supply purposes, a preferential use. but that use is subject to AWW paying compensation to the power owners for the water they take. And essentially the way that's done is it's basically the value of that water had it been used for generating power. So it's kind of like the lost opportunity cost for the power owners for that water, that if they used it for power production, this is what they would have gotten. That's, it's essentially the way it's set up right now. There's an agreement that dates back from 1984, and you'll hear it referred to as the 1984 agreement. And probably you've heard a lot of this already, but I just figure it's probably good to go through and remind everybody kind of where we are. And that 1984 agreement was with the Alaska Power Administration. It was a federal agency that owned Eklutna at the time, and it that set up a compensation system under which this power was this lost power would get paid for. And it also set up the ability for AWW to use a portion of their facilities, essentially the intake valve that's sitting in the lake and a part of their tunnel to where AWW's tunnel hooks into it. We actually have a picture of that in the slides, but that agreement compensates the power owners by a formula, and that agreement has been in place continuously since 1984. However, under its original terms, that 1984 agreement would have been set to expire on December 31st, 2025, here very shortly. It has been extended for a brief time to June 1st, 2026. So it's coming right up, unless it's replaced with something else or further extended potentially. The other agreement that you're likely to hear a lot about is going back to kind of the history of it, the Eklutna power owners bought the project in 1989, and then shortly thereafter, they entered into what was called the Fish and Wildlife Agreement, which I'm sure you've heard a lot about, and it's also called the 1991 Agreement by a lot of people. And that agreement was essentially among the power owners, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the National Marine Fisheries Service, Alaska Energy Authority, and State of Alaska. And under that agreement, the power owners were required to study impacts to fish and wildlife as a result of the power project and develop proposals for protection, mitigation, and enhancement of fish and wildlife resources that had been affected by the project. But it was also required to consider the impacts of those fish and wildlife measures on electric ratepayers, on municipal water utilities, on recreational users, and adjacent landowners, and available means to mitigate those impacts. So the 1991 agreement then also required that the Fish and Wildlife Program that was to be established or selected by the governor. And in the 2023, sort of fast forward to 2023 and 2024, we had sort of a confluence of some of these things coming together. The impending end of the 1984 agreement for AWW's water, and the need to look at the Fish and Wildlife Program under the 1991 agreement. In that, in sort of mid-2023, the power owners came to AWW and we entered into negotiations over what's become known as the portal option, the portal valve option, by which a portion of the water that the power owners have would be transported partially on AWW's system to a valve structure that would dump water into the Eklutna River, rewatering it from most of its length, but not all. Those negotiations eventually resulted in preparation of the three agreements that are at issue today. And those again, those three agreements were intended to address the impending end of the 1984 agreement and the need to continue access to the water for Agglutina Lake for public water supply. And also for the need for the power owners to propose a fish and wildlife program. So the three agreements that you have, they have three separate purposes. Number one, you can actually go to the next slide, I believe. The first one is the Water Facilities Interconnection Agreement. And that agreement is essentially boiled down to a construction agreement, effectively for constructing that, constructing the facilities by which the portal valve and any other related facilities to make this happen. The second one is the long-term water transportation agreement. And that one is an agreement that would go into effect once the portal valve comes into use. And it's the agreement under which AWW agrees to transport the water belonging to the owners to the portal valve using AWW's facilities. And the third one is the Water Rights Agreement. And this one is effectively the replacement for the 1984 agreement. This is the one that where AWW would continue to have have access to the water from Agglutina Lake, initially essentially in the same way that it does now, through a permit and not water rights, but over the long term, it would eventually result in AWW obtaining a portion of the water rights currently owned by the power owners, for AWW to have its own priority water rights, as opposed to just a preferential permit that it has to pay for every year. Just for, sort of also for information, the amount of money that AWW pays the power owners is approximately, for the water, is approximately $1.2 million a year. So I can stop there if there are any questions, and then I could dive into what's actually in each of the agreements briefly.
I have a couple of questions. So you mentioned priority water rights, preferential use agreements. How does one get the first priority water right?
Water rights law is essentially first in time, first in right. So whoever gets them first, subject to any preferences that are granted by law, they're the ones who have the first right to the water.
That's to every entity other than a tribe that might have had 1,000 years of history there, right?
I'm not a water rights specialist, and all I know is who filed for the water rights on Agglutina Lake.
Right. Thank you. It's a loquitur, I think, is the legal term. So thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Otherwise, I'll move on to a description of what's actually in each of these agreements.
Actually, before we move on, I'd like to quickly go to the next slide just to give a kind of a visual of where these agreements actually apply, because we talk about the various tunnels. There's a hydro tunnel, there's an AWW tunnel, the little diamond or the little triangles, those are the dams on Agglutina Lake. So you have the upper dam that was built in later on, you have the original dam that was built in the 1920s that has since been removed. Obviously you have the Agglutina Water Treatment Facility. You have the tunnel that goes through the mountain to Connect River. That's the hydro tunnel. The interconnection agreement essentially is where we are connecting into that tunnel. And then at the end of our tunnel, we have a tunnel through the mountain about 1.5 miles long that goes to what's called our portal valve. And that's essentially where that tunnel comes out of the mountain and goes to direct bury through the creek there, through the river valley. And so essentially about 1.5 miles down the river from the existing dam is where that portal facility is located. And so if you look at those agreements, the interconnection agreement is really where we're connecting mutual infrastructure, AWW infrastructure, hydro infrastructure. And then we're transporting a portion of that water through our facilities between the connection to the power tunnel and the AWU portal. And then the water rights agreement essentially, applies to the water that's in the lake and providing water to the equipment water treatment facility.
Okay. Moving on, we can talk first about the water facilities interconnection agreement. And again, this is the agreement by which the portal valve and any other necessary facilities will be built. It's effectively just like a construction agreement, except some of the key terms are that the power owners are basically responsible for everything. They are responsible for designing, engineering, obtaining all approvals other than those, required by AWW, performing related activities. They're also responsible for reimbursing AWW for any costs that it has in this process and overseeing this process. AWW gets to approve all the plans and have review rights and, just as you would expect in any kind of construction agreement of this kind. In general, there's two pieces to this. There's basically if you can imagine a T in the line, where at the T there's some valves there to be able to allow isolation of AWW's portion and of the owner's portion from each other, depending on what's going on. So they'll be referred to. There's the owner's portion and the AWW portion. You'll see those referred to in the agreements, and that's essentially what we're talking about. The valve that goes, that I think this is an important point, is that the valve that goes from the main line down to the owner's release structure is going to be controlled day to day by the owners, so that they can vary the flow of how much water they want to be going through there at any one time. But AWW at all times maintains the ability to override and shut down that valve in case there's some danger to the AWW system or to its to its water quality, or to if there's a big gusher of a leak or something like that, we would have the ability to shut them off without their consent, prior consent. Now, there are, of course, provisions for contacting one another and communication that you would expect in a situation like this. But the important thing is AWW maintains ultimate control of its line.
I'd like to add to that a little bit. We have perfected this process at another power facility. So when Municipal Light and Power owned Plant 2A, that we have a heat exchanger over there that provides cooling water, essentially takes heat away from the power plant, adds heat to our system, which helps with our reservoirs and helps with freezing of services in parts of town. So we've done that where we have shared infrastructure and a very clear bifurcation point in instrumentation where we mutually have control, but we also have that set up so that if there's a problem on our system, we can immediately shut it down. They have safeguards on their place. So we have worked through these agreements in a similar fashion where we have shared infrastructure that has potential for harm to either party, and we've managed to work that. And that's been in operation for going on 10 years now, and it works very well.
Mr. Persinger, what about the potential harms that we have had some conversation about relating to the portal valve? Because I know that in my discussions with certain of your team of engineers, those risks haven't been clearly identified or managed.
Mr. Constant, I would say through the negotiations through these agreements, the provisions that we put in there for all the engineering controls throughout the process. And again, as a licensed professional engineer operating under prudent utility practices, I believe that this can be done. And it's a very good process for us to go through. Again, getting our water rights down the road, getting our compensation capped, and providing a path forward for the future of us having water rights and access to them is
right. So that was a separate topic, the water rights conversation. I think we'll get there, but we're talking about the interconnection and the technical elements of it. And what I'm hearing you say is you're confident that the technical elements are managed to a point of safety that you're confident. I've heard otherwise from other members of the AWU team. And so
I am confident that we can make this work with the agreements that we have.
The safety of our water supply portion, not the,
Safety of the water supply, that's my number one goal. In fact, in our strategic plan, our number one goal is obtaining up water rights for including and protecting the future of the water system. So it is it's the top priority for the water utility at this point.
right. I think then some communication to that effect might be in order to the working group. Thank you.
Okay, moving on to the next agreement, the long-term water transportation agreement. Again, this is the one where AWW will transport the owner's water because it remains the owner's water. It never passes into AWW's ownership. We're just providing them some transportation along our pipes to go from their hydro tunnel on the yellow line there on the slide down to the portal valve. And essentially, this is a no-cost event to either side because they are, in return, allowing us to continue using the intake valve in the lake and that portion of the hydro tunnel that goes from there out to where it interconnects with the AWW tunnel. So it's kind of we kind of recognize that both of us need to use each other's facilities, and this is the agreement under which we do that. It contains a lot about communications back and forth, protocols for when we're going to be doing maintenance, or if we have to do shutdowns, either planned or unplanned, how that's going to work. And it also, talks about, okay, how are we going to how are we going to just maintain this thing going forward? Moving on to the last one. Well, and then one other thing it addresses has to do with who's responsible for which parts of maintenance, where are the lines drawn, in effect, of who's responsible for maintaining this, who's responsible for maintaining that. Moving on to the next agreement, which is the water rights agreement. This one is the replacement for the 1984 agreement. The key terms to this agreement are that AWW gets continued use of the water from the owners for public water supply. It's going to be subject to compensation. However, the calculation will change. Under the current calculation, it's the avoided cost, as I explained before, of the power that could have been generated with that water. But now it's going to be capped at a total of $600,000 per year, subject to inflation. And that $600,000 cap is payable by AWW either in cash or in kind. And that's important because AWW actually has a generation facility at the Eklutna Water Treatment Facility that uses that generates power for the treatment plant, and actually more that it puts back on the grid. And that power that goes back on the grid is going to act as an offset to its $600,000 obligation per year. The other thing that's of really important, the really important part of this too, is that there is an option now for AWW to obtain water rights, actual water rights, not just a preferential use, but the actual water rights, a portion of the owner's water rights up to 41 million gallons per day, which is essentially the same as the preferential use that we have now. That at the end of 35 years, the first 35 years after this, we will no longer pay any compensation. We will get those water rights for free. They will be given to us. And from then on, we won't have to pay for those water rights, and we'll have those first priority water rights that at least on the same priority as the Eklutna Power owners do now, because it's going to actually be a portion of theirs.
Mr. Johnson.
Thanks. So to make sure I follow that correctly, you're saying we get the water rights starting 35 years from the day of the execution of this agreement, so 2060 or so. Can you explain kind of the rationale for why 35 years is the right amount of time?
I don't know that there's necessarily a rationale for a particular number. It was a negotiated term where there were some very heated negotiations over this topic. As you might imagine, the power owners were not excited about giving us a portion of their water rights at any time, in any way. They found the arrangement as it currently, as it's set currently, to be perfectly acceptable. So, but what we were looking at was the long-term water security for the ratepayers in the municipality, and especially, and so we were willing to wait 35 years ultimately to get that. I think it's also important.
I have Eva and Joe raising their fingers like they want to jump in the queue, so we'll let
Just,
them.
just to add on,
phone a
expand
friend.
through the chair, Member Johnson, just to expand on that. There's a power purchase agreement with a term of 35 years that we currently have in place with Chugach and MEA, the other operators of this, and who owns what at Eklutna may change at the end of that time. And so I think that's the thinking behind the 35-year term, if I had to guess.
Okay, I appreciate that. And yes, I think securing our water rights is a good goal. What's the risk then? I mean, it's such a long time horizon that circumstances or other factors come up between now and then that we have to sit down, renegotiate this. And at some point somebody says like, well, due to this or that, we no longer think that the water rights, should be granted to the city starting in 2060. You know what I mean? I mean, just sort of think about the risk that such a long time horizon creates for us. Is that significant?
I can speak to that a little bit. The terms of the MLMP transaction were 35 years for the Anchorage hydropower facility to maintain in our partial ownership. And then at the end of those 35 years, the other party is authorized to purchase if they can secure the purchase. And so the 35-year time arc, which I kind of have a parallel question on that, is in alignment with the overall long-term effort to move the utility from the feds to the local, from the local through the 91 agreement to our final point of exchange, which would be at the culmination of the terms of the MLMP transaction to Chugach Electric. So in some ways, it's all part and parcel of a larger process. And Joe, please correct me if I missed any of that.
No, I think that's correct. And just to elaborate on the nature of the risk, yeah, there's going to be increased risk anytime you have performance extending over a longer time horizon. Partly what mitigates that risk here is that the contract here says that we just get those water rights at their time. There's no discretionary decision at the end of the 35-year term where everyone has to come back to the table and decide whether we get those water rights. This contract, if executed, would say that we do.
And if I could add to that through the chair, we also added some other things to the contract options. We tried to foresee what could happen between now and then. Things like, okay, what happens if they sell out or they stop producing power or they shut down the project, and all of those things, would trigger an option for us to obtain those water rights earlier. Now we may have to pay, if we get them a little earlier, like if they were going to sell the project to somebody else and we wanted to exercise either a right of first offer or something like that, then we might have to pay at that point, but we would still have the ability to come in and try and protect ourselves with our water rights.
And I would add to that too. If you look at water rights, Alaska is we're a very young state, but I have a lot of colleagues across the nation, and particularly in the Colorado River system. And 35 years in water rights is a very short timeline and the finances surrounding water rights, when we're over allocated, it gets incredibly crazy. And so this gives us a path to owning our water rights outright. And if, in this business, ownership of water rights is everything. You can have, preferential use, you can have permits. State constitution even provides for preference for drinking water. But again, it's under a water right. And if somebody owns that right, you may be paying for it. And currently, we're paying a certain amount for it. This gives us an opportunity to cap what we're paying, essentially saving as we go through that and own those outright. And that is very critical in this business.
One more note, not that I need to, please don't assume that I support all of this. We can deliberate that later, but that when you think like a utility, just like when you think like a city, you think in longer terms. You don't think in 3, 6, and 10-year terms. Investments should last real measures of time because they're expensive. So just another layer to that. And I have a question on 35 years. I guess it's kind of answered. Essentially, if they change the terms or try to change the terms and we have this agreement, it's in our favor. Ultimately, we kind of have the cards better in our hand than we would otherwise if they're coming out and saying something's fundamentally changed. We need to renegotiate the terms. The terms say we take possession, then it's, as you said, it's an asset if a transaction comes up, but it's still better for us. Anna?
Yeah, so you mentioned the owners, I mean, obviously this is all in negotiation, so I guess I'm just trying to understand. So this seems like one of the biggest benefits to us, even with the waiting, even with the long time scale considered. So what are we giving up, or what is the trade-off? I mean, that's really what I'm trying to understand, is what are the big mechanics here? And especially in AWU's interest, or really the public's interest for our water rights.
In all candor, I would say that we didn't have to give up a whole lot. I won't say that we had them over a barrel, but we did have significant leverage during the course of these negotiations, and that's why we were able to make this deal.
And just to follow up on that, I mean, AWU is not having to give up a whole lot. I think that the trade here, right, what Chugach and MEA are getting is the municipality's agreement to facilitate implementation of the portal valve option. So that's the alternative, that is the primary alternative adopted by the governor in his final Fish and Wildlife program. So that is something that I think AWU had some concerns over, that the Chugach and MEA needed to implement this plan. And so that is kind of the give in this set of agreements.
There's one more give. And it's not a give that the utility or the previous administration, or the utilities give a damn about. And that is the authority of the assembly over its prerogatives granted under the charter that were swept away in the process that was intently negotiated without one of the parties at the table. And so in some ways, what this decision will be, if it is made, is it is a tacit or future approval of a past bad action, us saying we give. And so that's one of the gifts that we have here, which we can discuss more later. Zach.
Thanks. What is the duration of our obligation to provide access to the portal valve, or AWU's obligation?
The entire life of the facility.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, back to you.
That concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Eva and Joe.
Thanks. So you've now heard about the agreements and what's in them. So just again, to go back on the history, initially these were put before you in December of last year. The chair went through some of the history of that. We did come then in April and put out an S version, because in the interim between the original negotiation of these agreements, before they came to you, some other stuff happened. Specifically, proposals were submitted to the governor of Alaska, who had the discretion and authority to decide what the final Fish and Wildlife program would be. And through a combination of Chugach and MEA submissions advocating for the portal valve, and municipal submissions in the summer of 2024 advocating for exploring a pump storage hydro alternative, which could have the benefit of potentially rewatering the full length of the river, restoring all species of salmon, as well as increasing power generation potentially. So through all that advocacy, the governor issued the final order, which said, all right, you're going to move forward with the portal valve, but you need to study pump storage hydro and see if if that is actually the way it should go. And so we have been engaged in that process. Mr. Spafford can speak to it more. But in April, we submitted the S version to the Assembly. And what it does is it takes the three agreements and makes some significant but minor modifications to them. Specifically in the whereas clauses of each of the three, it acknowledges the governor's order and the direction to study pump storage hydro. And then at the end, it includes a provision that acknowledges and provides for the circumstance that if pump storage hydro is ultimately selected as the one that is actually going to follow through and be implemented, then we should come back to the table and renegotiate, because these agreements will no longer be the thing that we need. So the S version contained those provisions.
So I have two questions, if now is the right time. Okay, so the first question resolves one of the biggest offenses of the previous process, which was the term of confidentiality and secrecy that was applied to the utilities. So they could not be earnest and frank with us about what was going on and what we were giving up. And so first, is that term in here, and is it removable?
Thanks. Yeah, so you're referring in one of the three agreements, the interconnection agreement, there was a provision in there. There was a confidentiality provision that is pretty standard, but there was also specifically a provision on AWU public statements that pretty significantly restricted AWU's ability to talk. And I understand that was the product of a very particular situation, but its terms are quite broad. So that's Article 14.5 is the AWU public statements part of the interconnection agreement. Subsection A, there are two parts, there's A and B. Subsection A is no longer applicable. The time for that has already passed. It applied to time periods up until the governor issued his order. But subsection B would still be in effect, and we do think it is problematic. We would recommend, if you approve these, which we hope you do, we would recommend imposing that a condition or requiring deletion of the article, I think it's Article 14.5B, because it does prevent AWU broadly from saying anything that could have negatively affect public perception of the final Fish and Wildlife Plan. And just operationally and in terms of government accountability and transparency, that's a problem. What if there is a workplace injury that needs to be talked about? What if they discover a flaw in the design that needs to be talked about? AWU does need to be able to speak honestly about how the process is going. So I think that we would recommend approval with that deletion.
By condition, what do you mean? How would we do that? Because I don't think we can amend the agreements from the floor.
Yeah, and so these agreements, I think the Assembly has had a lot of conversation lately about what level, like how much contract comes to you. You approve the contract terms, right, and the material terms, but you don't necessarily need to approve every line and every word of the contract. And so here, I think you could just impose it, add a floor amendment or to the ordinance that has an additional subsection, right, in the ordaining that says prior to execution, Article 14.5B of the interconnection agreement shall be deleted. That would, I think, be adequate. And then that would just direct the administration before, if it gets to the point of signing these, before signing them, to just strike that through. And I don't anticipate, I can't speak for Chugashinemi, but I don't anticipate that being a big problem.
If we were to ask for this to be drafted, who would be with the pen?
We're happy to do it. I'm sure
Okay.
Assembly Council is happy to do it. So your choice, but we can take that on.
So now the more complicated question. I have a lot of feelings about all this. I've had a lot of experience, and in some ways, I feel like this is asking us today to go back and justify misdeeds and inappropriate abuses of power that were not so long ago, but long ago enough that it's not front of mind for most of the members. So, but the one thing that should concern all the members of the body, if the charter commands us to be in charge of these utilities and practice prudent utility practices, the fact that we've lost our vote by RCA edict that we were supposed to have according to the terms of the transaction. Somehow the RCA has positioned itself between the parties after the fact to change the terms of an agreement that was over years ago. And this all comes down to the municipality having any say in the operation of the utility that we are 19% on the hook to pay for. So we are paying for it. That's the Anchorage hydropower function. And currently, under the current conditions, have no authority to do anything. We just have to let Chugashinemi be the government for us. And that is anathema to the public process, anathema to how our charter is written, I think to the law as well. But that's a matter for another day, maybe. We have applications for the RCA to fix this, that the RCA gave us some guidance that said, okay, just reapply for a new certificate. And we sought the support of Chugach and MEA in that process. And we were told, members of the assembly who are negotiating, if you just change this section of the code to allow that the mayor is back in the kind of driving seat of certain decisions, then we'll join you on that. And of course, after the fact, we did our part. The parties, MEA and Chugach Electric, decided, at least as I heard from our attorneys, from their attorneys, decided not to support. And so we have given and we have been taken advantage of, I think, but here is one more opportunity, I believe, for good faith and fair dealing to actually return to this process. And that would be, would it be reasonable for us to add a similar condition that states that approval of these agreements are contingent upon them supporting our application with the RCA to get our per capita vote authority, so that 19% we are forced to spend, we have some say in, because the fisc is ours, the public trust is ours, and yet the authority isn't.
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think ultimately the decision is for the assembly to make. But I will say, it is, I think, when the 1991 original agreement was made, right, it's always been contemplated the municipality not just owns part of this undertaking, but also has a voice and a vote in how it works. And the vote was lost and has not yet been restored. And I think that it is going to be difficult for the assembly to see in the years to come decisions being made, money being spent, and knowing that it does not have a voice if the vote has, again, not been restored. And so right now the voting structure is a little bit interesting for the body that we're talking about, where the municipality, if it had its full vote, it would have veto power over the other two owners. It would have veto power over Chugach and MEA could vote together, municipality could veto that vote. And given that we own 19% of it, maybe that sounds a little funny. So one approach that the assembly could approve, or that the municipality could take, is to voluntarily drop its vote down to just a 1/3 vote. And that could be more palatable to Chugach and MEA. It could be more palatable to the regulatory bodies. But I think that it's, the assembly's decision ultimately, hopefully in conversation with the administration, to decide if there are safeguards that it wants to put on its approval of these agreements, such as that, making it conditional before allowing execution of them.
So if such a motion were to be proposed, would the same drafter be willing to take up the pen, get that language ready before us?
Yes, we do try to do what we're told.
Provide services. Okay, so I would ask for those amendments to be prepared. Yeah, so I probably have a lot more feelings than anyone else in the room. If Meg were here, we'd probably feel her presence across every corner of the room. But here we are, and it could be a fair deal. So, Eva, any last notes?
I will say, if any members have additional follow-up questions or want to know, the different ways this could play out, we're available to talk. I'm here every day, and I'm available over the weekend as well. So I know you have this coming before you on Tuesday night. And so if you're interested in hearing our risk assessment and what the options are, please let us know. But broadly speaking, the assembly can reject the agreements, could approve them as is, or could approve them with some conditions.
So I have a question from Erin Baldwin Day.
Yeah, thank you. Eva, I was wondering if you would be willing to just outline in a bit more detail for the other members present how it actually came about that the municipality's vote was surrendered, and just the procedural steps that have been taken to try to restore our vote.
Sure, happy to. And I should say I was not around when all of this happened, but we have spent a lot of time looking at it. So during the MLNP sale, that transaction needed regulatory approval from the Regulatory Commission of Alaska. Anchorage Hydropower Utility was created as part of that process, and the municipality had to provide somebody to lead that. The Regulatory Commission at the time concluded that our proposed person was not didn't have enough or the right type of experience to lead an electric utility, a hydropower utility, and said, okay, municipality, we're going to approve the sale, which is, you know, a good big victory. We're going to approve the sale. It's going to go through, but you got to put your vote down. You don't get a vote on this committee until you have a prudent operator in place. So subsequent to that, in early 2024, I believe the Assembly filed a suit for the Regulatory Commission of Alaska. I think outside counsel for the Assembly who filed that is here if you have questions for them. That suit was unsuccessful. Summer 2024, the administration, Anchorage Hydropower, through our outside counsel, different outside counsel, brought another suit. I think they're trying like, okay, we're going to learn some lessons, like let's try it again in a better way. From the administration side, that did not work. The RCA said, nope, try again. So we tried a third time. That suit is ongoing. And we are, working through it. So it's a process. I would say it might be a long process or it might be a short process. We don't yet know.
Does that answer your question, Aaron?
Yes, and so I think my follow-on to that would be, I'm getting a little bit of feedback from a microphone. Can somebody turn off their mic in the room? Amazing, thank you. You know, understanding that this might be a protracted process, you know, if we were to amend these agreements such that execution was contingent upon some activity by the other power owners to support the return of our vote, perhaps on a per capita basis, what would happen with the, I mean, how would the existing agreement continue or not in that intervening time?
So that's set, as Mr. McLaughlin said earlier, that's set to expire June 1st. So we have a bit of a window to work it out. I would say if we can get into a place where we are working, this is my assessment, in true, you know, collaboration and partnership with our co-owners, with Chugach and MEA, then I'm sure I just am confident that we could negotiate something to carry us over until we have a final decision on that. But actually I'll just leave it at that.
Thank you.
Okay, sorry, did anybody else from the administration wanted to? Doesn't look like it. Okay, other questions from members? Okay. Let me just check. I'll ask one more time if anyone on the phone has questions. Okay. Well, I think any other kind of closing comments from folks on that side of the table? Okay, well then I think with that, we will adjourn this work session, and it sounds like this item will be on our agenda for Tuesday. So members, please follow up. Department of Law has offered to answer questions if you have any. Thank you. And we'll be adjourned. This is our last meeting of the day. Oh, sorry.
So there is a technical matter relating to emergency powers that is kind of currently a little hot lava question that might need us all to stick around.